This mini lecture will cover sections 1.1 through 1.4, and the goal of these mini lectures is to kind of give you an idea what things you should be looking for in the reading. I should point out that in reading the textbook, I don't expect you to understand everything. That's not the goal of the textbook. The purpose of the textbook is to get you to start thinking about these things, to introduce you to some of the terminology, and to get you to start asking questions. So with these mini lectures, I'm hoping to kind of focus in on some of the more important questions and more important thoughts from each section to kind of help you out. So in the very first section, it's basically an introduction to what we're going to be talking about. And what we're really talking about is matter and the interaction between matter. Now, the interesting thing is that there's really only three components of matter that we're worried about: the electron, proton, and neutron. Those three things comprise basically everything that we see. Now, obviously, there are some other particles that interact and do things, but as far as we're concerned in our everyday life, all of the things around you are made out of those three building blocks. So in this first section, just take a look at what are these things, what sort of scale are these things existing on, and what's possible. I mean, this is dealing with everything from the microscopic scale all the way up to the scale of the universe. And it's basically just electrons, protons, and neutrons. Now, the next three sections really focus on the concept of interactions. And what you want to do by the end of these sections is have an idea what an interaction is, how you can tell if one is present, and a really good question to ask yourself is it possible for interactions to be one way? In other words, if you have a ball interacting with some other object, does that automatically imply that that object is interacting back with the ball? Or is this just a one-way street? So really focus on what's going on with these interactions. The section 2 starts off with talking about motion diagrams. These motion diagrams are basically if you were to take a strobe picture of motion and you kind of mark off the position at regular time intervals. So here, this arrow is indicating the direction of motion, so this object starts off here and moves along here. Notice that between each time step, the distance traveled gets bigger and bigger and bigger. From that, we can draw the conclusion that there has to be some sort of interaction that's making that change. Interactions ultimately are about change. That's really what we're looking at. A little bit later in the section, they get into a little bit more formal type of motion diagram where each arrow is representing the direction of motion. It's representing the velocity. One thing I want you to notice is that they're not merely connecting the points with the arrows. All right? This isn't telling you which way do you go from this point to this point. It's telling you at this particular position, which way is it moving? And notice that this arrow is pointing off away from point 2. That fact alone tells us that there's some sort of interaction going on, because at this point, this guy's moving this way, but something is causing it to go in a curved trajectory of some sort. So with these motion diagrams, you don't want to just connect the dots. You want to make sure that your arrows are indicating something useful. The dots themselves don't need to be connected. The arrows contain a whole lot of information. So when you're reading through these next sections, make sure that you develop this idea of what an interaction is. How do you know if an interaction is there? Also in section 3, take a look at Newton's first law. There are 3 more laws that we'll be talking about, and Newton's first law is, of course, the first one. So what exactly does it mean? An object moves in a straight line and at constant speed except to the extent that it interacts with other objects. In short, this is saying something about the fact that constant velocity is the natural state of motion. an object moving in a straight line will keep moving in a straight line with no interaction at all until something interacts with it, causes it to speed up, slow down, change direction, what have you. So at the very end of section 4, it kind of gives you a summary of the changes as indicators of interactions. So make sure that you've got a good understanding of that, and try answering some of the purple questions, 1.x.1 through 1.x.5. The answers for these, by the way, is located at the very end of the chapter on page 47. So go ahead, take a look at those, and I hope this helped.